Let's go to the beach. So I'm going to be talking about Beowulf. And Beowulf has some definitely strong themes running throughout it. It's all about courage, what it is to be a warrior in that era. This is a Maori war. There's a guardian of the beach. Beowulf has some strong themes, including water. Water is throughout the whole of the epic poem. Either swimming through it and fighting deep sea monsters, or monsters hiding in it. Should watch where I'm going. Let's have a look up here. There's obviously other themes such as kingship, what it means to be a gracious host and to receive hospitality, what it is to be brave, to have courage and to face up against your enemies. So you can fight all of the monsters that come your way. You can gain renown. You could be considered world famous, somebody to look up to. You could be courageous. You could amass immense wealth. But ultimately, you're never going to defeat death. So Beowulf, not sure how it should be pronounced, but I'm reading it from the Norton anthology. It's quite long, and I've read it before, but of course that was no intention to talk to it to camera. Having read it and realised the depth of this thing, I'm not going to be able to cover everything, and certainly not to any degree that I've seen experts talk about it on YouTube. Professors who've spent all their lives studying this. It was written in my old neck of the woods, supposedly. So I'm from Leicestershire, in the Midlands of England. And that used to be the Kingdom of Mercia. And it was assigned by modern editors to be originally composed in the dialect of what was then Mercia. So I can't say I recognise the landscape as discussed here, but there you go. And we don't know who wrote it, but it's certainly, or it appears to be, the work of a single author. Although, saying that, even with the English version, there is an insert, quite a large insert, that suddenly seems to be out of the flow. And it's a poem. It's like at a feast about Sigismund, if I remember. I'll check that, or I'll get to that when I come to it. So, it's a single author who is Christian. So if we put ourselves back to that part of the world, it's the Danes who did mass migrations. They were the Anglos, the Angles who came over, and then the Danes, and settled large parts of what was then Roman Britain, and they pushed some of the original Britons further west. And they settled, certainly around Leicester, and had this tradition with them of these epic poems, lays. And it's considered great, a classic, because it survived. I saw a very interesting video of a guy talking, a professor, who raised the question is, we don't know what the people at the time thought of it, and whether they thought it was any good. Because there would have been others and similar written versions. Perhaps there were better ones, but this is the one that came down to us and throughout the long march of history and has survived. And is considered a classic then. Whether you think it's good, as this guy said, that's down to you. So this guy who's writing it is definitely a Christian. We know this because at the very beginning, if I open up pages here, he talks of the Lord of life, the glorious Almighty. And Grendel, who's the famous first monster that we come across that has to be got rid of, the author states that he's descended from the line of Cain, so which is obviously Old Testament. So this world of the Danish pagan faith was starting to transition slowly towards Christianity, and the old ways were falling away. But we have a story in which the people beset by these monsters are falling back into the old ways. What the author thought of that, or was trying to put across, can be a bit vague, but I wonder if it's him, I assume it's a him that wrote this, is trying to say that God is in control of everything. It's the destiny. Everything that happens is all because of the will of God. And therefore, he imposes this Christian sensibility onto the actual story at certain points in the story. It's not overbearing, and believe me, when I first read, I didn't even pick it up, but I have now. And as he says, it's in days gone by. So the writing is, I guess, even by then starting to become antiquated. There's a lot of kennings, which I've mentioned before, which I love. I've come to love kennings. So rather than talking about the water, as I showed you on the beach, it's a whale road. Fantastic. And I don't think it's in here, but another similar kenning would be the breaker of trees, which is the wind. And so what we have is the forebears that give rise to Beowulf. And to get to that point in the story where we are introduced to him, we very quickly fall into some beautiful language, even rendered into modern English. So I'm just going to read something out here. His warrior band did what he bade them, when he laid down the law among the Danes. They shouldered him out to the sea's flood, the chief they revered who had long ruled them. A ring-whirled prow rode in the harbour, ice-clad, outbound, a craft for a prince. And similar to the use of language throughout, very eloquent, it's very beautifully concise, but it gives you this sense of place and being there. It's very good at the world building. Well, I find it. And straight away, the first note that, apart from the language that I've noted here, is kerning. So, in Pressy then, there is this king called Hrothgar. He's quite old. And he is a king of renown. And he builds this mead hall for his warrior folk, his kin, who are there to be feasted and entertained and wenched and given mead and rings as booty from war. And that's what the role of the king was. Thomas Carlyle, in his excellent book about the French Revolution, although it was a bit over-flowery at first, he talks about kings of old and the fact that the word king comes from the Germanic Gurning, which is the title that was given to a warrior who was strong physically and strong in terms of politics to become the king. And the king was maintained so long as the king could give food and mead and a place to, bed and board, basically, for the warriors. And as long as that happened, he was tolerated. And what is stated here is that one king that they're putting to rest was the great ring giver. That's an idea that this king was expected to give booty and largesse to the warriors who were fought for him. It was obviously a very unsettled age, and warriors had to prove their worth. One of the themes is what it means to be a warrior. and then to be able to boast of the exploits that that warrior has managed to do and get booty, and then have a bard tell a tale about it and put it to music and poetry, which is what we see with the big insert in the story when it comes to what's known as the Finnsburg episode. And it's about the king's poet performed his part with the saga of Finn and his sons. I said Sigmund, but it's not, it's Finn. And that's the kind of poetry that a warrior was eager to get. They wanted to be able to boast of their exploits because it gave them standing. It gave them prestige. And then they would be buried, no doubt, in a mound to be honoured forevermore with the warrior's trophies that he'd gathered in his life and his sword and whatever. A bit like Lord of the Rings and the Barrow Wights. So Hrothgar makes this the Hall of Halls. Heorot was the name. Beautifully built wooden, massive building which you could feast and be entertained. In New Zealand, when I was thinking about the video that introduces this, what could I show that was very similar? The only similarity would be a marae, which is the welcoming hall for Maori, but that would be inappropriate. And secondly, not big enough. They're not as big as Heorot would have been. And so, as soon as this hall, in which Hrothgar, the elderly king, has built for prestige, pride, suddenly the powerful demon, a prowler through the dark, attacks. This is Grendel. And most people, when you think of Beowulf, probably would know the name Grendel. And before I read it, I thought it'd be a female demon, but it's not, it's male. And he comes over and he keeps attacking the mead hall. And in fact, there's this wonderful scene in the movie that was made where he would come in, and the movie says that he was upset because his ears were so sensitive. The feasting and the warriors singing upset him. He wanted to come and end it. It's not here in the book, in the lay. But it's a perpetual problem that Hrothgar can't deal with. And of course, that's going to put to doubt his ability to be king. And quite a lot there to think about. And I'm going to put something out there that it's in my head, but I'm not sure has been said elsewhere. It could have been. One of the deadly sins for Christianity, certainly in this period, which is often written about, is pride. Pride before a fall is one of the deadly sins, isn't it? And therefore, this is a prideful act to build the Hall of Halls. And then instantly, the line of Cain starts coming over and attacking. And I wonder if there's any connection there. Someone will be able to tell me if I'm completely off track. Straight afterwards, when he's talking about Grendel, I'll just read what is written. And I think it shows the Christian background of the author. He talks about haunting the marshes, this is Grendel, desolate fens, and I quote, "He had dwelt for a time in misery among the banished monsters, Cain's clan, whom the Creator, as God, had outlawed and condemned as outcasts. For the killing of Abel, the eternal Lord had exacted a price. Cain got no good from committing that murder, because the Almighty made him anathema, and out of the curse of his exile there sprang ogres and elves and evil phantoms, and the giants too, who strove with God time and again." This world, this Celtic Danish world, monsters were real, and so were dragons. And from the Christian perspective, that was an issue that they wanted to obviously alter. But changing the hearts and minds of a whole culture takes, well, centuries, as this seems to be saying. Because although it's looking back, they're obviously, at the time it was written, still believed in. Still are, in some parts. Grendel's powers of destruction were plain. And there's this wonderful, lovely word here I love. Their wassail was over. So wassailing is basically taking cups of mead or cider and drinking and beer and having a good time. Did that in the Navy a lot. Their wassail was over. They wept to heaven and mourned under morning, as in the dawn. So there's this problem with this Grendel, who waged his lonely war, inflicting constant cruelties on the people. So there's this real tension, and how's it going to end? Because no one in the mead hall under Hrothgar can help. So, exit right comes Beowulf. The hero comes to Heorot, who, and it says, there was no one else like him alive. This guy is like, I don't know what the term would be. If you was to consider the phrase Mary Sue, I think that's correct. That in modern films, if a character comes in and can do everything, and you've not seen how they've managed to do that, think of Rey in the Rise of Skywalker and stuff, the recent Star Wars movies. She's been criticised being a Mary Sue character, can do anything. Well, Beowulf is very similar, but obviously I don't know what the male version of that would be. He comes in and he offers his help. And one of the themes, as I said, about the whole of this epic is how he's received, how he behaves, how he respects the authority of the elderly and obviously incapable king to get rid of this. And then he boasts, a bit of pride, but that's expected then, to go out and defeat this Grendel, and then eventually his mother, and does so. And Beowulf is about how he does it. And there's this, I suppose I have to argue, which I've never done before, but I have to alert you to spoilers. But I mean, it's been around for thousands of years. It should be known by now. But if you're not had it before, then turn off. There's this great scene, and in the movie as well, where Grendel has his arm ripped off, and that is what they begin to feast over. And think, it's all done, they got rid of the monster. No, his mother has to be dealt with, and so on. And then, certainly by the time you got into 10 pages, you've only got to the fight with Grendel again. And then the mother comes along, and it carries on because it takes its time. And a lot of it is repetition of feasting and boasting and all this, and then explaining similar things with Finn and so on and so on. But it sets the scene of this world in which to be a warrior is effectively what the only thing a man could do. And then another attack. Grendel's mother, monstrous hell bride, brooded on her wrongs. She had been forced down into fearful waters, that theme again, water, and cold depths, after Cain had killed his father's son, felled his own brother with a sword. So this linking of the curse on this land is ancient, and these monsters have been around forever. What we're going to do? But anyway, Beowulf fights Grendel's mother, and another celebration at Heorot, and then he goes off. And what's interesting, when he returns home, it carries on, and the politics of that place, and that even though he has reached the pinnacle of what it is to be a man, a warrior in that era, he still kowtows to a lesser man, a king. His time does come, but we jump forward very quickly, 50 odd years, until he's an older man, Beowulf. And it says here, the wide kingdom reverted to Beowulf. He ruled it well for 50 winters, grew old and wise as warden of the land. So it's an aged Beowulf now. And Beowulf believes he can still fight monsters. And when one arises because of the folly of another, who goes into the cave or it's very Smaug-like, where the dragon is protecting its treasure. Old Harrow of the Dark happened to find the hoard open, and then the dragon has to be dealt with. And I've just made a note here I'd like to read out. Yet the price of the rings, does that sound familiar? Was too proud to line up with a large army against the sky plague. He had scant regard for the dragon as a threat, this is Beowulf. No dread at all of its courage or strength, for he had kept going often in the past, through perils and ordeals of every sort, after he had purged Hrothgar's hall, triumphant in Heorot, that's the mead hall, beaten Grendel, he out-grappled the monster and his evil kin. And therefore Beowulf, as an old man, is going to do it again, because that's what's expected. Not wanting to give too much away, I suppose I'll have to. There is a son of Weohstan who comes in. He almost takes over the narrative, because something happens to Beowulf, and okay, I'm going to have to say it, because to make my point, Beowulf dies, and there's a funeral. And it's an epic story. It's, thankfully, because of the Norton anthology, footnotes to explain things if you didn't know. There's a lot of like shieldings, and some of the words don't make sense in modern English. You have to be told what they are. There's no equivalent. And it does really well here. What's interesting, a lot of the words used actually come from Northern Ireland, not Mercia. So I'm assuming this world was already starting to transmit and interchange words, which would have come down into Middle English and then Modern English. Also, there's parts where it's missing. It's plainly, I believe, the original document suffered fire. We're lucky to have it. But of course, in the digital age now, we can maintain it forever. So it's a really gripping story, but it's a long one, and you have to work at it, what I did. And I haven't really touched on the poetic beauty of it. I'll leave that to others. I haven't really touched on a lot of the imagery, which just conjures up in your mind. It's so expertly done. And I think that's why it's considered worthy to be studied today. And the themes are, as I said, what it is to be a king, what it is to be a warrior, what it is to gain renown, but more importantly, you're not going to defeat the inevitable. However strong you are, however high up you get, however much fame, your end's going to come. And I suppose once you've read Beowulf, I mean, to this day, having read it now a couple of times, I can't go to the sea and not think Whale Road. Every time. I did it today when I was filming. Likewise, humility, which is a Christian virtue. This is a Christian writing this, don't forget that. What is the Christian sensibility trying to come through? It's effectively be humble, be duty bound. I wouldn't say God-fearing, that doesn't come across, but I'm assuming that he's trying to put across the Christian virtues. And yes, okay, part of your culture will be to boast and show off and da-da-da. But ultimately, realise it's vanity. Vanity, vanity, all is vanity. That's what I take from Beowulf. I'd be interested to know what others take from it yourself. Is this something that I would recommend? Yes. But you have to go into it knowing that it can be difficult. The first time I read it, I just picked up the book. There was no real notes apart from at the front. And I struggled through it. It was too alien. But the Norton Anthology does a really good job of explaining it and guiding you through it and helping you through it. So it's beautifully crafted, it's very well done, and it's a very famous piece of work. And I'm going to refer to somebody. I did some time back a thing about what is it about a book. And very nicely, Poetic Arson did a wonderful video reply. And there's a couple of things that struck me that I think I need to state that apply to this. When you study anything old like Beowulf, anything ancient, and if, not in this case, this is a modern copy, But if you manage to get an old version, say from the 17th, 18th century, you're dealing in history. You are part of that historic flow, that thing that's in your hand, that's been around for many, many years. And Beowulf puts you into the world, the ancient world, and you're dealing with ancient ideas, and mainly, many of them are still with us today. You know, pride and respect and steadfast duty, they're just as much important now as they are at the time of Beowulf and before. And that they last with you, the ideas that's within them, within the text, even in the modern context. And it's just finding and realizing what those themes are, why they're so important to the people then, in the past, in our childhoods, and now. So thank you for that poetic answer. I had to use your ideas there. So Beowulf, that's my take. What's yours?